Okay. It usually says that it's starting to go live, but it is live. So hello, Liz, how are you this morning? Oh, this evening for you in the UK.
Evening for me. Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you, Calli.
It's lovely to have you on today, Liz. For those who are watching this live or are watching the recording, Liz Keable is a teaching and learning specialist, and she specializes in metacognition. And I have been following Liz's work on social media and LinkedIn, and definitely resonated and got hold of Liz and said, please, 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 would you come and do a bit of work with us here on the ARC Education, because metacognition has become a keyword, hasn't it? Or a buzzword, really, Liz, in the past few
Yeah,
years.
particularly the last couple of years. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. But not a lot of people realize or know or have learnt anything about metacognition. They don't know what it is, why exactly we need to be inculcating metacognition into our children's education. So I'd love to start, well, first of all, if you'd like to give everyone a little bit of background about yourself, but then if you could talk about what metacognition is, basically.
Okay. Yeah, that's the more important part of it, what it is. I started out as a science teacher in high school, and became particularly interested in the way that students were learning. As much as I loved my topic, I loved the way that students learned, and that became a fascination for me. So every job that I have done since then, within education, has always been related to advocating for improvements in what the students receive in school. So I think that's, and I'll say a bit more a bit later about the role that I was doing just pre-COVID. But you want to know what metacognition is? As you say, it has become a buzzword. It's a combination of two different words. It starts with the meta, which comes from the Greek, and was originally used by Aristotle, the philosopher, a long time ago, when he first invented the word metaphysics, because he wanted to explain that things went beyond the physical. So he used the Greek word meta, which means going beyond, as part of that metaphysics. And we now use it as a prefix to cognition, which comes from the Latin, which is cognoscere or cognoscere, depending on where you learnt your Latin. But it's from the Latin word, which is to learn. So what happened was when, I think he was an educational psychologist, but John Flavel in the 1970s was trying to come up with a word that would help describe the importance of students being able to go beyond the learning. So not what they were learning, but how they were learning it. And so he came up with the word metacognition in order to describe that going beyond the learning itself. So the importance of metacognition is having the ability to consciously analyze your own thoughts and take sufficient ownership of them to recognize when they need changing, and then be able to change them in order to get a different result.
So it's basically being really aware of how and what you're thinking.
Yeah, it's a consciousness about what you are thinking, and includes, I think one of the most important bits is that ability to change your mind so that you can get a different result from what you were getting, which means in school, changing your approach to learning in order to improve academic results. Although I might add to that changing the way you think can have a huge impact on mental health as well, which is obviously an issue, particularly an issue now. So learning to think in a metacognitive way is very good for mental health. But my interest in metacognition started when I was working with students as an independent success coach. After I'd finished working for a team who were supporting young people in care who had behavioural issues due to previous trauma. But that was part of a project that came to an end, and I had to decide what I was going to do next. And I decided to offer my services to schools as an independent success coach to work with the students they were most worried about. And it very quickly became oversubscribed. But what I discovered was that whatever the problem the student was facing, whatever was stopping them from making the progress, that they were all able to move forward with confidence once they knew how to change the way they were thinking about themselves and about the learning process. So in fact, I was telling the teachers not to tell me what the problem was, because it wasn't important. It was, where are they at now? What do they need? How do we move them forward from here? And it was when I started talking to teachers about the progress that these students were making that they started using the word metacognition. They were going, oh, it's metacognition. Oh, yes, that's metacognition. I'm thinking, yes, it is, but I've never dared use the word because nobody seems to know what it means. So at that point, I decided that I would start using the word even before it became the buzzword that it is now, and was explaining to people what it meant. But I thought it was important that we started to use that word because of the impact that it has. So, you know, as a final thought on that question that you asked me, I think it's really good that schools are currently considering the development of metacognition in their students, because it is so vitally important for learning.
I absolutely agree. And it's just occurred to me listening to you talk. Metacognition really goes into the metaphysics of life.
Yeah.
because, you know, and another sort of buzz concept at the moment is that we create our own reality. And we do that through our focus. And if you are not aware of what you're focusing on, you're not aware of what you're creating in your life. So like metacognition, you know, what it is bringing awareness to your conscious thought, and actually bringing the unconscious to the conscious, so you can do an act, you can choose by an act of will which direction you want to go in.
Exactly. Well described, yes.
And so it's a really exciting concept, because here we are we're teaching children to create the life or the reality that they want, rather than just be subject to.
Not living by default. Yeah, that's it.
Absolutely. And not only children, because, you know, this is a big it's a big concept that really needs to be taken up by the adults as well, because and obviously by educators themselves. So what do adults need to do to begin to introduce metacognition and to use it in their day practice? And that's not just teachers, you know, it's anybody who works with children or with young people.
Yeah, or any adult really that wants to, as you said, to live life by creating it for themselves rather than living by default. Yes, it has a great deal of significance for adults. I've written down here the names of some scientists who did some research into this, so forgive me, my Chinese is not not that strong, but I think the names are pronounced Qi, Su, Ni, by Tsang and Lee was a group of scientists who were looking at metacognition. What they really wanted was to find the place in the brain where it was happening. They wanted to pinpoint and go, that's where metacognition happens. Unfortunately, despite all their research, they couldn't find it. And the conclusion they came to was that all they could work out was that it's definitely part of the decision-making processes that happen in the prefrontal cortex here behind the forehead. And just one simple quote from quite a hefty paper says that the metacognition is the process of considering the outcome of a decision and whether a decision should be adjusted. Now, the significance of that is that the way we all experience life now is the cumulative result of all the decisions that we've made up until this point. Now, there's some of the decisions have been made for us when we were younger. So it's might not have been our own decisions, but all the decisions that have been made, either by us or other people, have created, as you said, the life that we have now. So the significance of that is that for students in school, using metacognition is all about making decisions that will help them to improve learning. But for adults, it's about making decisions about how to improve life itself. So, very significant for adults. So, I mean, who we are is made up of the environment that we grew up in and the attitudes of those that were around us at the time, the schools we went to, the friends we made, the type of employment that we've been in, the relationships we've formed, the money we've made or not, the interests we've followed, the opportunities we've taken or not, as the case may be. Those things involve a lot of decisions that have been made along the way. And so we might want to stop and question what we are basing those decisions on. So just as an exercise, if you bear with me for a moment, I want you to picture the past. All right. So in your head, if you picture the past, I'll give you some clues. So just not putting you on the spot about how people have told me that they picture the past. So some see the word past, some see pictures from their own childhood, some see characters from history. Some see it literally as a timeline, either going in either direction, the either side of them for the past and the future. And some see like the past physically behind them. So people hold the past in their head in a different way. Have you got a particular way that you're?
Well, the minute you say past, I think of time. And when I think of time, I think of a circle.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So you see how we all hold that concept of the past differently. Yep. And then for the next one, try picturing the present. So what the present looks like. So again, some people see the word present. Other people just think about the current moment that they're in and what they're doing right now. Others see themselves in relation to their work or their family, or others see it as something more specific than that, at a time when they're meditating or doing mindfulness or something like that. That art of being here now is kind of a,
yeah.
That's
exactly what I saw, funny enough.
That's what you are, right.
I saw like a column of light going through me into the earth.
Yeah, so you're right here. Yeah.
Right here now. Yeah.
Okay, so we've done the past, we've done the present. Let's go to the future. So again, some people see the word future. Some people see that timeline again, either going either side of them or front to back, as them on the line that way. Some see a vision of their own future, what their hopes and dreams are. Others kind of see the future of the world or the planet. They see peace, or they see it destroyed, or whatever they feel is going to happen. Any views on that one yourself?
Avoid.
Right. Okay. Because it's not here.
Possibility. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we all hold the concepts differently, but the point is that inside our heads is the only place where the whole of the past, the present, and the future all exist together at the same time. the past is nowhere to be found except inside our heads.
Wow.
The future is nowhere to be found except inside our heads. And the present moment is all that we've got. So what it shows is that the capacity of our mind is huge. And it's metacognition that allows us to analyze everything that we have in there in order to make decisions. And because it's all held there, we can change our minds about any of it, because what the way that we hold it in our heads means that we've got control over it. That's what I was saying earlier on about metacognition, is taking control of your own thoughts, or recognizing that they're your thoughts and owning them, as it were.
Yes.
Yeah.
Take responsibility.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
that means that we can actually change our minds about things, including the past. In that sense, we can actually change the past. And what can hold people back, even if they realize that, is they can be affected by the opinions of other people, because other people don't like it when you change. So some people just, even if the change doesn't affect them, they just don't like the fact that you have changed. So just as a final thought on that particular question, metacognition is very much a personal process for each of us, unique to each of us as an individual, and is all about what we've got going on inside our own heads, whether it be an adult or a child, really.
It's all based on experience
Yeah.
That's my understanding of what you're explaining. Yeah, that we and each of us have had unique experiences. Some may be similar to others, but we each experience things uniquely, in our own way. And
And we're all filtering the information that's we filter it as it goes in, and we filter it again as it comes out.
so
So
I guess it's really closely related to the sort of the concept of unconscious beliefs that are actually created during our individuation phase, which is, between birth and 5 years old. Those experiences we have are and even pre-birth, in utero, you might experience something as scary or as lack or as anything really, and you form these beliefs of how the world is, and that becomes your perception, your unconscious perception. And so my understanding about metacognition is making those unconscious beliefs conscious, so that you can actually make a choice as to whether they serve you or not in any situation.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's fascinating stuff, because it all it's different ways of saying the same thing, or fingers pointing to the moon, as the Buddha used to say. And it's the moon that we want to be looking at, but so often we look at the fingers instead of the moon. And metacognition.
And I think, sorry.
Metacognition.
I was going to say that a lot of what you've said is linked to what I was saying earlier as well, about what we base our decisions on as adults. So if we all go back a bit, like you were saying, to the very early times of our lives that we don't remember very much about, is that learning is via that unconscious absorption using natural cognition. We mentioned cognition, which is the natural inbuilt ability to learn. And we all have that, barring serious health problems. Every child will learn, as you said, even in utero. So the problem is that we don't remember much of it, especially the first 2 years, because the brain is functioning using longer, slower brain waves. And they don't allow much consciousness. because their purpose is to download information. So it's about that constant absorption of information, the constant downloading of everything that's going on around us, which is creating a very hefty database for future reference. It's a protection. It means that we're not going to get overloaded by having to learn and relearn simple things. It just means that we absorb it, and it takes far less time, far less repetition in order to learn a huge amount of information. So on purpose, the brain is learning in, as I say, with those longer, slower brain waves that just become shorter and faster as we get older.
Yes.
But as you mentioned, though, we have to think about what it is that we're downloading, because it's our environment in that first 5 years and even up to 7 years, until the brainwaves that allow us to reason effectively kick in at round about 7. But until then, we're highly influenced by parents, friends, neighbours, the television, our everyday environment around us. Yeah, exactly. And the problem is that we have no control over that, because we don't have the skills at that point to reason on it, to ask the right kind of questions, to give any value to what it is. So we're just downloading anything and everything that's there in our experience with no question mark over any of it. It just becomes our database without us really being aware.
Really.
Sorry, say that again.
It becomes our modus operandi, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And we're not aware of where it all came from. That's the thing. And I think for me, one of the most important
scary stuff.
Yeah. For me, one of the most important aspects of that is that that's when our self-concept is formed. So the view that we hold of ourselves is part of that 7-year download. All unconscious, affected by the environment that we're born into, and is the result of how other people treat us and what we are told, affected by the experiences that we have. So it's also going to be related to any cultural, religious, or financial status that our caregivers have, and all form before we have those reasoning skills that kick in with the shorter brainwaves when we're round about 7. And that means that when we start school, our achievement will be affected right from the get-go by our self-concept, and particularly in relation to what we think of ourselves and our ability as learners, and our understanding of what learning actually is. And for me, one of the issues is that very few people acknowledge that there's a huge chasm between how we learn preschool from curiosity, our own curiosity, the experiences that we have, and we are driven by that and learn a huge amount just from being interested and wanting to know. And that's very different from how children are expected to learn in school, where the what and how are dictated by the system and everything is taught to us. And I'm not criticizing teachers, but they are teaching us rather than us learning for ourselves. And that's a very different way of learning.
Yeah.
And some
and teaching, I've always considered myself more a facilitator than a teacher.
Yeah. And that's how I worked as well. Yeah.
And that totally influenced how I work in a classroom, or even as a tutor or whatever, in any capacity as a teacher. I always go from what I'm given by the child, and that is probably because I went to a university where metacognition was a thing. even though it was 30
That's
years ago.
wonderful.
You know?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, you know, I heard the word metacognition 30 years ago at university, over
yeah,
30 years ago
yeah,
now. Um,
yeah.
but I was one of the lucky ones, you know. Like you said, it's not really teachers' faults because
No,
not,
no,
they're not trained. Many
no.
teachers aren't trained in the I guess in psychology and sociology and those sorts of those oh, I guess the metacognitive forms of education, you know. The
Yeah.
these days teacher training is well, I believe is woefully inadequate, and that's why we have instructors rather than facilitators in the classroom, I believe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
And part of the problem too is that some children never bridge the gap between those two different ways of learning.
Mm.
They continue to try using that natural cognitive process, that
Mm.
natural ability to learn when they get into school, and don't recognize the need to change the way that they need to approach learning. And that those kind of changes are necessary for a child to succeed within formal educational setting, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So if you left school feeling rubbish about yourself, as I did, it
And I
doesn't
did.
mean that you can't, yeah, exactly. And it doesn't mean that you can't learn. It just means you were never taught how to do it in the way that is expected within the education system.
Absolutely.
And that's something that I had to come to terms with. I mean, some people obviously also have barriers that where they need the support to find a solution that will help them to
Mm.
learn more effectively. And if they don't get that, then they can leave school feeling rubbish about themselves. And with my experience, I was one of those students that they kept saying she has so much potential.
Mm.
She's got all this potential. Not that I knew what that meant at the time.
Yeah.
And yet I just fell further and further behind in high school, and no one questioned why. That's what, as an adult now, I'm concerned about was the fact that there was an obvious issue and yet nobody questioned it. And I loved learning. I
Yeah.
absolutely loved new things. But it didn't stick in my head, so I couldn't pass the assessment. And I think the final straw came when we were getting ready to do the equivalent of today's exams, which at that time were called O levels. That's how old I am.
I did O levels too.
Yeah, they wouldn't let me take the biology exam. And the words they used were, it's not worth us paying for you to do it because you're not going to pass it anyway. So it's not worth it were the words. So, I was not
So you're
worth,
not worthy.
I
Yeah.
wasn't worth the money that they had to pay for me to enter the exam. And that kind of put the lid on how rubbish I already felt about myself,
Yeah.
having kind of struggled through high school. And the problem with that, of course, is that when you leave school with a poor self-concept, is that it has a negative impact on what you do next, because you didn't
Absolutely.
get the qualifications you need, so you can't do the job you wanted. And for me, that meant going into marriage and children early because there wasn't anything else.
Yeah.
And so we can all end up with this kind of domino effect that's really hard to escape from, because things have gone in a different direction from the one that we would have chosen for ourselves had we, known that we had the choice. So if you want
Exactly.
different results, metacognition is the key again, to making that change. It seems
Yeah.
to be the key to everything.
Well,
So
absolutely. Can
yeah.
you give some examples how metacognition have changed lives, so to speak, like for adults and things?
Yeah, I can give you some suggestions on how we can change lives.
Mm.
If we've got time, I've got one or two stories. We'll see how the time goes. Don't get me started on the stories. We'll never finish. But it's never too late to change your thinking in order to get a different result. And you don't have to go back to the beginning. You can just start right from where you are now and literally start changing your mind to help you move forward. So I'll give you some examples of how we can do that. The first one is you can start asking yourself whether each thing that you do, whether it's actually based on a choice that you've made for yourself, or whether it's something you're doing because it's an idea that's been put in your head by somebody else, especially the things that you're not happy about, things that you feel uncomfortable about, you're not quite happy with the direction they're going. Do check in with yourself and say, did I actually make this decision for myself? It's something that you can start analysing, but a technique that's quite helpful is the one that you've probably heard of before, that was created by the founder of Toyota cars in the 1930s, which was that why. I think he calls it the 5 whys. I just call it the multiple whys. So you ask yourself, because you can't change anything on the surface. He wanted to devise something that would get to the root of any particular problem. And so we can't change anything about ourselves on the surface. We have to find, as you said earlier, that kind of deep-seated subconscious why. And that's why you need to ask it more than once.
Yes.
So you think of something that you do, and then you think, well, why do I do that? And then when you've got an answer to that, yeah, but why do I do that? And you just keep going until you actually get to the real reason why you do something or believe something or whatever it is, because it's only at that point where you actually get to the real why behind everything that you can start to change your mind about it. You're taking ownership of the thought, you're analysing what you're thinking, you're taking responsibility, whether it's your own thoughts or stuff that's been put there by other people. It doesn't matter. They're your thoughts. You're taking responsibility.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then you can work out whether you want to change it. It might be that you do that exercise and you think, no, I'm perfectly happy with that. That's what I want. And that's fine. But if you come across something that's not fine, that you think, no, I'm doing that because of somebody else, then you can start thinking about what actions you need to take in order to change that particular thing that you're not happy about.
Yeah. Liz, have you heard of a man called William Whitecloud?
No, I can't say I have.
I think you'd be fascinated to read his book. It's I've got it over here. Natural Success. It's the steps to natural success. I'll actually put it in. I'll put the book and the author in the comments. Sorry, it's too early in the morning. My brain's gone into reverse. He does some really fascinating work around unconscious beliefs, and is exactly what you've been talking about. And he through his reading and through his research and stuff, he's discovered that there's actually 12 unconscious beliefs, only 12, that all our beliefs are based on those 12. And according to our experiences, we tend towards, certain beliefs. But we probably have aspects of all of them in our unconscious. But there's a really good exercise there that he calls conflict resolution process, and it sounds very similar to the 5 whys. So
I think another book you might want to put on there if you're going to start a book list is the Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton. That's one of my favorite books, that one. If you fancy a scientific read, it's quite, he's coming at it from the scientific point of view, so there's quite a lot of science in there. But and we mentioned earlier on as well about being able to change the past. So, something that we can do is think about a distressing incident from our past that we're still carrying around with us, because we do that. We hold on to stuff. And we can change the narrative that we have around that incident, because that's an unconscious thing as well. We often haven't made that conscious choice to hold on to it. It's another unconscious thing.
Because it's actually painful.
Yeah, exactly. We've decided to hang on to that distress and it's become a part of us. But changing the way you think about what happened can change the impact that has on you. So neuroscience actually tells us that it's not about what happens, it's about the way that we personally react to what has happened. So two people can go through the same experience and yet feel completely different about it, because of all that previous stuff that we've talked about before. So it's actually our own thoughts that enable us to recover from that and move on, or remain a victim for the rest of our lives if we so choose. But we need to make a choice about that. And it's something that metacognition is particularly good at, is allowing us to rethink a situation and make a different choice about how we react to it in the here and now, because we can change that right now.
Right now. And that's the only thing that you can change.
Exactly. Yeah. And that will then have a positive effect on our own well-being. And it may involve forgiveness, because that becomes more possible with the metacognitive process. People who find it hard to forgive are not thinking in a metacognitive way. You asked for stories. I've got one for this one. I was running a course. I was invited into it's actually a factory who were moving operations from the UK to China, and were making a lot of people redundant as a result of that. And so they had the foresight to invite me in to talk to people about the potential for choosing a new career at that point. So it was very much based around this metacognitive process, although I didn't use the word at the time. And one of the activities was to think about this, to think about whether there was something that had happened that we needed to forgive somebody for. This was about being free to have your own mind and make your own choices and not be impacted by other stuff. So I spoke to this group. This was a very small group I was working with, and this young man sat there and suddenly looked utterly stunned. And the chap sitting next to him said, "Are you all right, mate?" And he said, and he then told us what was going through his head was that he had wanted as a young man to be a soldier, and he had made an application to go into the army, and was so excited about going into the army and waited for his letter of admission. It never came. And he was gutted, and so he kind of drifted into other things because he couldn't go into the army. And what he didn't know at the time was he had received an acceptance letter, but that his mother had destroyed it because she didn't want the potential of him going to war, which as a mother you can understand. But he was so devastated that his mother would do that to him when being a soldier was his big dream, that he had never forgiven her for it, and that had stayed with him as a hurt ever since. And this man was now, I would have guessed, somewhere in his mid-30s. So we went through a process then about writing a letter to somebody that you need to forgive, and actually stating, what they did to hurt you, and the fact that you're now forgiving them, and you finish it on a positive note, and then destroy the letter. Because it's to get rid of it out of you. It's nothing to do with the other person.
Yeah.
And in fact,
isn't it, Liz? It's actually not for the other person. It's for you.
Exactly.
It frees you. It doesn't free the other person. And they don't even need to know.
That was actually an issue with somebody else in that group who kept saying, "Oh, I'm going to send this." And the rest of the group going, no, it's not meant for that. It's meant for you. But they did my job for me. They talked him out of it by explaining the purpose behind the activity. But it might be that that's required in order to help us to move on. The other thing that metacognition also allows us to do is to adapt more effectively at the time when stuff happens. You know, if we're talking about something that happens that changes our lives, because we all have times when life does not go according to the plan that we had for it. And so we all have these major events that crop up that change what we had planned for our future. We've got a vision of what our future looks like, what we're where we're aiming for, and yet something happens that completely turns that around. And so we're faced with a future that looks less desirable than the one that we had planned.
Yes.
And that is when metacognition allows us to change our perspective about the future as much as it does about the past. Because instead of trying to get back to what's been lost, which is where people suffer more with their mental health and they struggle a lot more with their emotions, is when they're trying to go back, to get back on that track that they had to start with, which is not always possible, depending on how major the change was. But what we need to do instead is to look forward and find the hidden benefit of that change. So, I mean, an example of this is I was doing this with a group once, confidence building group. I used to run groups in the community for confidence building. And I had a lady that just suddenly kind of looked up at me when we were talking about this. And she said, "Oh," she said, "I've just realized she'd been really upset about the death of her mum, who she had looked after for some time. But doing this activity had made her suddenly realize that she could now start traveling she hadn't been able to. She'd been looking after her mum for about 10 years or something.
Oh, wow.
And she suddenly realized that, as you know, as much as it hurt to lose her mum, that it had opened up this new opportunity for her, that she could now do the traveling that she had always wanted to do. So, you know, it's going to be different for everybody. But another example would be, for instance, if someone had an accident that lands them in a wheelchair, they're not necessarily going to get back the mobility that they had before they had the accident, but they can look forward to what else they can achieve whilst in a wheelchair, if you see what I mean. So,
Absolutely.
but it's about that change, that being able to change the way that you think, and it all happens kind of really deep down inside. And we talked earlier about belief, but also that self-belief. One of the things that I recommend under this idea of self-belief is to actually bin the word can't. Just get rid of it completely out of your vocabulary, because
I always said it was a swear word in the classroom.
Yeah, exactly.
And with my kids, don't swear at me.
Yeah, that's it. I used to have an activity where I would make them create the word can't and then physically take the T off and put it in the bin, so that they were learning not to put the T on the end. But the problem, of course, is that the subconscious mind believes everything it's told.
Absolutely.
So if we use the
Without
word
judgment.
can't, exactly, it becomes the truth
Yeah.
for our subconscious mind. So we have to change that narrative, and we can change it to I can, which can feel wrong to start with if we've got no idea how we're going to make that happen. So it's like, I can, and how am I going to make that work for me, to make sure that I can. And the problem is that I can't is something we often tell ourselves, but that prevents us from putting any more thought into it. It stops us seeking a solution. It stops us considering how we could get a different result. So basically, it stops metacognition, which is not
which is not ideal. And I guess another thing actually that William Whitecloud talks about is creative tension. How nothing is created without tension. Nothing, not the earth. You know, you think about Big Bang, that was it. Us, we're not created without tension either, you know. Giving birth is anything that is created from tension, and in fact, creativity is tension resolving itself. But when you aren't using metacognitive thinking and we tend to resolve that tension for ourselves, which actually does not create anything. We just back at square one.
Yeah, we tend to
And
cover it over, don't we?
yeah,
Submerge it rather
yeah,
than, yeah,
we kind of try and make ourselves comfortable rather than actually hanging with that tension
yeah,
and allowing it to resolve itself into whatever it is we want.
yeah.
Because it's not comfortable.
No, no,
Metacognition isn't a comfortable thing, you know. Learning isn't comfortable for that matter.
yeah. It's one of the things that I
Yeah.
think it's important to teach students is to
Mm.
sit with the discomfort of
Yes.
feeling challenged. But
Mm.
we'll talk about education in another podcast.
Yes,
We're going
absolutely.
to get distracted at this point.
We're doing very well, I think. Yeah,
So have you
so
got,
how vital do you feel our role is when it comes to developing metacognition in children as adults? And
yeah,
not just as teachers, you know, parents, as
mm,
any significant adult in a child's life. Um,
yeah.
how vital is our role? And um, you know, how how much responsibility is it really?
Mm. Yeah,
Mm.
I've had so many conversations with people over the years who have read about metacognition, they know the word, or they feel that they know it's a real benefit to learners, but they tell me that they can't get sufficient a grasp on what it is in order to implement what they know. And for some, it's a confusion over what the word means.
Mm.
We said, and that there's an extra confusion over the two meanings of the word meta. So when John Flavel first introduced the word metacognition into education, he meant the going beyond, the
Yeah.
Greek word going beyond the learning.
Mm.
But there's a Latin word or a Roman word, meta, which means turning attention on itself, which is where you get the thinking about thinking
Yeah.
process with
Yeah.
from, where
Mm.
some schools have gone down that route, which personally I'd rather they didn't, because thinking about thinking is a philosophical debate
Yeah, it's an
rather
exercise.
than,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly, rather than the personal application side of things.
Mm.
So you've got some people who are kind of confused over what the word means. Some say that they don't know how to apply it, which you can't actually. It's not something that can be applied to somebody from the outside, which as teachers we tend to want. You know, I want something I can get hold of and I can give them.
Maximize the
You can't, yeah, exactly. You can't do that.
Yeah.
And there are others that feel that there just isn't time to teach metacognition alongside a hefty curriculum and all the assessment demands and so on. So the problem tends to be that metacognition is all about what the student is thinking and what processes they are using personally to learn. And of course, they're all doing it differently, aren't they?
Exactly.
Which is a nightmare when a school starts trying to think about how they're going to do this. They're all doing it differently. What am I going to
Yeah.
do?
Mm.
So it's about changing the way that students think about themselves as learners.
Mm.
So adjusting to how much in tune they are with the learning process
Mm.
and helping them become willing to become actively involved with it. So developing metacognition in learners is essential for success in academic learning, particularly in informal situations,
Mm.
and for feeling confident about engaging with education. So what I say to parents is, don't worry about education, worry about your child's ability to learn. And that's where the
Absolutely.
metacognition comes in, which we'll talk about another time.
In another time. Yes,
Yeah,
indeed.
exactly. And for teachers, it's more about creating the right environment in the classroom and communicating in a more effective way to draw out the thoughts of the students.
Mm.
So we'll talk another time about what parents can do, and then again about what teachers can do in order to develop the metacognition. And that's develop is the operative word. It's very much about developing it in students who don't have it.
Yeah.
And from my own experience, what I can tell you is that every child, barring serious disability that reduces their ability to learn at all, will make progress if they're taught how to think differently. For me, the important thing is that we naturalize it rather than formalize it, because that's what schools are often doing, is attempting to turn it into a formal activity.
A program.
Yeah, a program. Yeah, exactly. And so it's often with like templates. Ask yourself this question, this and this while you're doing this, reflect on this by asking this question. And that's all fine if you've got a child who already has some level of metacognitive ability. But so many students don't. They just haven't developed the ability to think that way. So I think it's really important that as any adult that's around a child, be it parent, teacher, and whether it's a parent who is sending their child to school, or a parent who's educating their child themselves, or whether it's a teacher who's educating other people's children, it's the same thing, that we need to naturalize that ability to think, that ability to learn, and the ability to visit what's going on inside your own head and know how to change your mind in order to get a different result.
In other words, make a conscious choice, make through an act of will. Yeah, it's an act of will.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
And so often I hear adults abdicating their abilities in favor for I guess comfort or resolution in their minds, and to their detriment. So often I've seen people go, there's a light bulb moment about why something is reoccurring in their lives, but then straight away the act of will just disappears and they make an excuse. Well, that's why it's like it is. It's like it is, without going that extra step of actually saying, well, actually, I choose not to accept it like it is, and I choose to do it this way, not that way.
And I think that's a good reason for us caring about developing metacognition in children and young people, is because it's not just to help their education. We want them to benefit from the educational opportunities that are on offer to them, whatever those might be, so that they can achieve what they want to achieve. But also we're preparing them for adult life and for that ability to change your mind, make up your mind about what you want to achieve and going for it, which all requires the use of metacognition, or that, as I said earlier on, that those scientists discovered that it's about the decision-making processes in the brain. However we translate the word, it is related to making decisions, and we need to make good ones that are in our own best interests.
Yes.
As a self-preservation thing.
Yeah, well, before we go, because we're 2 minutes on the hour, which is absolutely amazing. There's been so much information just in this hour. It's been fascinating, and thank you very much for coming on. I have one quick question. How do you see mindfulness benefiting children metacognitively?
The thing that mindfulness particularly helps is that ability to hone in on one thought, because our heads are so full of so many different thoughts. And of course, children nowadays have access to even more than we did when we were children. They've input coming from everywhere. And so it's much more difficult for them to hone in on one thought, to think about things one at a time and separately. So that's the benefit of mindfulness, is to teach them how to focus in the moment on just one thing, which is obviously what you're going to need to do with metacognition, is hone in on a particular thought and decide whether it needs to be adapted, in order to, but I think it's very much, the connection is very much about the level of focus that's required to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Liz. I'm not going to take up any more of your evening. I'm so grateful for you coming on, and I've so enjoyed chatting with you. And Liz and I will be planning to do a couple more sessions, but those sessions will be recorded, and there will be an opportunity to attend those live. So keep your eye on the ARC Education and on the website, and which is www.thearceducation.co.nz, and also keep your eye on our events on our Facebook page. Liz, is there any way or any, I know that you are heading for retirement, a well-deserved retirement.
Yes, I've taken down my website, unfortunately.
Oh, you have.
With a view to doing less work. Yeah. But if people want to contact me, they could email me success@lizkeable.com.
Okay.
The Keable is spelled Keable. So Liz Keable, sorry, success@lizkeable.com. Or I'm on LinkedIn. They're welcome to send me a request on LinkedIn for connection if they want to talk to me.
Yes. And I suggest that people subscribe to your newsletter on LinkedIn. It's always full of magical bits and pieces. So thank you again. Thanks again. And for everybody watching, thank you for watching the recording, and keep an eye out for further developments.